Welcome to The Pursuit, the podcast where we talk about all things dating, specifically to those in the Adventist persuasion. Today's episode is on therapy and on how it has changed dating. My name is Josue Peralta. I'm here joined by my buddy Mike and my sister Abby. The reason why we wanted to talk about this is because in season 1, we talked about getting yourself ready for dating. And in part of that, it was all about, getting yourself ready financially, getting rid of yourself emotionally, logistically, etc. And one of the things we focused on as well was your mental health. Now, some of those topics regarding mental health that we talked about was like getting to know yourself a little better, on different triggers, things that trigger you to do bad things or good things. I don't know. We talked about realizing and recognizing what motivates you, what weaknesses you're seeing in yourself, do kind of an analysis of your relationships around you, your relationship with your parents, siblings, friends, etc. We talked about dealing with trauma, and obviously we finished off by doing the work. Now, after that podcast, and obviously that was 2 years ago at this point, the more I converse with people and like the more things I'm seeing on the internet and whatnot, there's things that, what do you call it, that are worth, I guess, noting. Some worth repeating, like some good things, and obviously, but there's also some pitfalls that are worth mentioning, I guess. Like I know, Abby, you mentioned a couple episodes ago, Michael talked about gaslighting, like, oh, you're just gaslighting, X, Y, and Z. And you're like, no, don't use that word like that. It's not actually gaslighting. It's actually X, Y, or Z. It's actually this. It's actually that. And I think that's part of the bigger problem, which is why I wanted to talk about it, how we just misuse therapy jargon. Another thing I'm noticing is like an over-analysis of things and just using therapy as a crutch. But that's just kind of an introduction to kind of what we want to talk about. Now, what I do when I have a conversation about with you guys is how therapy has changed dating, especially now in your late 30s, where, therapy and getting to know yourself better has been around for a while at this point. And theoretically, we should have a better idea of who we are and how that affects other people, though obviously not completely. But I guess I'll toss the question out to you. How would you say therapy has changed the dating? Like so if you say that the prevalence of therapy.
You say therapy, are you talking about just like going to like a therapist and talking to someone, or are you talking about like this?
I think, yes, that, but also the fact that there's much more knowledge or surrounding mental health topics and wellness.
John. So you're talking about like mental health, or just specifically like in terms of like dating, like
Well,
therapy?
the marriage of the two. So, for example, something I'm seeing that is good, like just like big picture, let's start big picture, is that therapy and a focus on mental health has really, really helped open up the conversation on things that were previously ignored. Yeah. Like be like emotional abuse that used to not be a thing or not really recognized. So then you would have girls in like, in relationship with dudes externally that they would be the perfect man. And they'd be like, well, why don't you like this guy? And they're like, well, behind doors, he talks, he yells at me, he does X, Y, and Z. And they're like, well, that's just how guys are. And it's like, no, we don't really do that anymore. We don't accept that kind of behavior. So therapy has changed the way we look at each other, in the way we interact, and the way we date, and things like that. So
Been a short curfew, historically, I don't know if I've like seen some like old like books on like dating advice from like the 1950s.
Yeah, like
It's very fun.
men are from Mars and women are from Venus.
Uh, I haven't seen that one, but they're like very like men centric. Like the woman is always to be subservient. Like there's one like, make sure you look good. Like don't talk unless spoken to. Things like that. Yeah. And so obviously, those were like kind of more, I guess, fitting toward like the traditional values. Cause, back in those days, everything was about, raising a family, having, a wife who stayed at home, and takes care of the kids, and things like that. So there was really no advice or relationship or advice like it pertains to like, how the woman was feeling. It was always to care about how the man is feeling. There's mostly some funny or we're really entering. I don't know if this is funny, but like there's always like a picture on Instagram. Like if a guy comes home, his dinner is could and there's a picture of his wife with a black guy. Like just stuff like that. Yeah, it's kind of really messed up. But it's all about like the 1950s. But you talk about like, abusive relationships and stuff like that. That's kind of a lot of what was I guess that was kind of like the norm. Not that women were getting beat, but like the norm was, yeah.
Well, sir, however, do we have to go that far back, right?
Yeah, I know, but I'm just looking at you said I was changing.
Sure.
And so interestingly enough, the marriage or like successful relationships were higher back in those days. Except around like the Outland, they were.
Weren't they though?
They were, but let me finish. Just because people were getting as high divorce doesn't mean like the quality of the marriage was,
Exactly.
they're not the best. Yeah, that's why you gotta let me finish. So they're all right. Eagle and chuckling. I don't want to talk them out. All right. However, once she introduced feminism and divorce, because it's realized the sexual revolution, a lot of that's flip flop where now females, when their concerns, their needs, like their needs are being looked at, and the men have to bring more to the table than just, I have a job, and yeah, that's right.
Guys want to have jobs though.
But yeah, women have jobs now. As I said, the feminist movement. But now we're seeing something different. I think it's done a lot to help with, people not putting up a woman not putting up with like abuse in the relationship, and men not being domineering or taking advantage if their spouse, like so many people even today still experience. So I think it's changed in that regard, but now it's kind of flip flop where we're seeing less success rates in marriage and relationships. So I think, yeah, it's changed, but I get individualization. Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's changed. I think in good ways, but also in bad hands down ways.
Well, I think relationships back then and relationships now are different, right? Back then, if we go back to the 1900s, like Michael likes to do, back then it was just more focused on survival and working and just your day to day, right? But we have evolved over time. We have acquired more knowledge, and now it's not just about putting food on the table. It's not just about tilling the land, it's the relationships have moved and transcended with the evolvement and have become more emotional, right? Because now we have all our needs met. We have shelter, we have food, we have all the stuff that wasn't guaranteed back then. Now it's guaranteed. So since that's solved, it's not a surprise.
Go there.
Well, okay, it's not solved, but for the
Generally speaking,
and let's say in the U.S., right? Because there's a lot of homelessness. I know that, but there's also lots of it's not a black and white issue, right? There's different issues. Uh, but I guess for the most part, it's easier to find food, Michael. It's easier to.
it's easier to afford food. I mean, like there was a specific.
Is it easier to afford? Yes, because now you have more jobs. Now, is it more expensive? That's so. I think cycle. Let me finish my point because I let you finish yours. So since there's more of that emotional need now, since more of the material is more readily available, it's it's harder to have successful relationships because the emotional aspect it takes more work than actual work because it's like it takes communication. It takes getting to know the inner person that you can't see, right? It's easy to see if someone needs food, I'll supply that, or shelter, done, done, done. So I think therapy has changed the dating game because it has broadened and it has made more accessible um, the different knowledge of self and others to supply that need now that we're just emotional connection. Um, Before I was behind a paywall of like therapy, you have to go to a therapist. But now it's easily accessible. that being said, with that being accessible, there's a whole bunch of people out there that think they're therapists, or you got coaches, you got all this stuff that if you're not careful with what you watch or what you listen to, and if you don't check their research, you can be led astray. So it's like, yes, it's more accessible. Yes, there's more names, things. It raises your value of self, right? You can learn to live yourself more. You can learn about boundaries, standards, how to be treated. But at the same time, who you're listening to can also either a good thing or a bad.
Agree to agree. I mean, I mentioned it before, but I think it's opened the conversation to things that we used to ignore in addition to improving our communication skills. I don't think I would be able to communicate as well as I do with it today had I not learned a lot about it and had I not nerded out about therapy. I've never gone to therapy, but I've learned enough to where, communication is not really an issue. Like, we learn to communicate really well. Now, how did I learn to communicate that? I don't really know how. I mean, you just have to. How did I learn?
Books, content you consume. It's not like
Okay,
just
well, I mean, obviously, but I guess I don't. I can't specify which one specifically. But who I will say,
what's this a special one.
a specific one I can point to. Although I will say that in his early stages, I don't really much subscribe to him now in terms of his views and his way of looking at life anymore. But Dr. Jordan Peterson used to really help me out a lot in terms of like learning how to communicate well and how to just be honest about what you want, because you have to negotiate things. You can't just assume the other person's going to want to do things. You have to it's like a give and take. I don't know how to explain it, but I learned a lot from him. I guess this was early before 2020. But another thing that I see big picture that's really helped is that in healing generational trauma. So like, our parents have gone through a lot, specifically mama, and she did hurt for her. Yeah. But I would say that, mom did a hell of a job in trying to pass that on along to us in doing the best way that she could. But she also did her best in trying to avoid passing it on to us too. She was kind of like the best of both worlds, I would say. But I think the three of us turned out pretty well in terms of not repeating the same mistakes that our parents made, which I'm really happy about.
That's simply I was gonna say that's still to be determined, right? Because I'm a firm believer that we continue to learn from our parents even as we're older, and they still continue to be role models in our life, even it's yeah. But here's my thought. Here, I'm just stating my theory, okay? And I've seen it in my life where, like, when you're little, all babies look at their parents, right, and then mimic their parents. As we grow older, we continue to do that, just not as like we're staring at them all the time. And I think that throughout life, even to adulthood, we may not act the same way, but I feel like the same values and stuff can lead us to um trying to influence us. Like, for example, like for me, I see it like my mom, like mommy, she works on herself a lot, right? She pushes herself to change, to try to understand people, to be more empathetic. And I see that as she does that, it has influenced me in trying to do that. Whereas she's still a role model to me. And like even it can be a unconscious, right? So I think that that's why I say TBD, because you can still work on yourself, but there's so many life experiences to come, right? We're so young. And how we deal with those is still to be determined. So
And talking about generational trauma, I saw a statistic, and this is funny. This kind of goes to what you were saying the first time about there being, um, like more availability to food and stuff like that. That's true in part, but like I know during the 1920s and 30s there was the Great Depression, and they realized specifically amongst the white families, because everybody was affected with it, but specifically amongst the white families, there was 1.5 million women who had their husbands leave them because their husbands felt that they weren't able to provide. Funny enough, that's something we see a lot, and jokingly a lot, in the African American community. today. But it's funny because it's not really, it's not like we kind of say, oh, that's a cultural issue or something like that. But it's really not. It's just it's a human psychology issue, like regardless of who you are, right? There's a lot of African American families who struggle with money and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
And so that leads to men walking out in a lot of instances on their families. However, wanting to say that because even, or I'm trying to match that with what I was going to say about you saying that there's more food available. But I think a lot of the issue is because now that women have the availability to
Provide for themselves.
You don't need a man, because back in those days,
we needed a man.
Like you couldn't get a job.
I
Like they
needed
would
somebody's last name.
Yeah, like you would literally. It was like taboo. Like no, we're not going to hire a woman.
If I was rich and I didn't have a husband, I would lose the money when my parents died because I didn't have a right to the inheritance. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and if you wanted to get a job, they weren't going to get you a paying job to provide for your family, right? So you had to. But now that's changed. So now men have to be like, oh, what do I bring to the table now? Women have to be like, well, yeah, what are you going to do for me? I don't need you here, right? And that's a good thing. I think that's generally a good thing. I think it adds like both, like if you come together, I think it makes a much better relationship, I think.
It's because it's pushing you up in the hierarchy of Maslow's needs, right? So I think we're at the point in society where
we're at self-actualization.
So it's no wonder
and I think that's how God wanted it.
I think that's how God wants it as well. But there's like the sin aspect that makes that really hard. Because no wonder dating is harder. No wonder commitment is harder. Because like that self-actualization piece, like it's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work.
Well, there's other reasons why it's harder too, but
I mean, well, one thing I'll say too is that I feel like the whole mindset of let's get therapy and better our mental health has seemed to benefit women more than men. I feel like men have been left behind in the therapy space for a lot of reasons. One I can think of is that men are generally stubborn and they don't feel like they have the need to be like, I don't need therapy. I'm going to be just fine. Like, just rub some dirt on it, right? Just kind of have that mentality.
Well, that's what we're kind of taught.
Yeah.
I don't think it's stubborn. I think a lot of men want to.
I mean,
there's definitely men that are stubborn, but I think a lot of men want to express their feelings, but it seemed to, be looked down upon.
I think also
or not manly.
That that spaces also aren't geared for men either.
Yeah.
Whereas there are mostly female therapists.
But I would
there's also, like, for example, you hardly see any male teachers anymore. You hardly see men in generally nurturing spaces.
They've always been female dominated, for sure.
Sure, yeah, but you don't. But now you see even more, even less men, right? To where we used to have Mr. Grismer, where we used to have a lot of these different male role models. Now we don't have that to be like, oh, okay.
How many male
this
teachers
is a little
did you
bit
have?
different.
In Bethesda, there was only Mr. Grismer.
No, there was Grismer
and
there
Mr.
Hannett.
No, that was high school.
There was Grismer. There was Giambi. There was Boswell as well.
Yeah, and right now you could say I still think Bethesda still has 3 teachers, 3 guy teachers.
I don't know.
So in theory, it hasn't gone down there.
I don't know about that.
At West, all the guys still are there. So I think
high school has more guys than women, but I think generally speaking that's still the case. But the point I'm trying to make is that with less men as role models visually, even starting up, you have less kind of a runway or less of a model to be like, oh, okay, this is what sharing your emotions as a man looks like. Because if you're not getting it at home, you got to get it from somewhere. And if all you're getting from somewhere is rub some dirt in it or just suck it up, that's not going to be particularly the best move, obviously.
Yeah, but I would also say though, it has more spaces have grown because of the whole self-help therapy for men, right? You have Jordan Peterson, which who
Right.
you quoted is one. So he's been an advocate for men.
So has Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan has a
Rogan as
huge
well.
influence.
Then you have
especially for those of our generation.
Then you have Justin Baldoni, right, with his podcast.
Justin Baldoni has a podcast?
Yes, he has a really popular podcast.
Wait, hold on. You're telling me he existed before This Is Us?
Of course. Justin Baldoni wasn't in This Is Us. It Ends With Us, you mean?
Yes.
Of course. He wasn't Jane the Virgin. That's how everybody met him.
I didn't
he
know
was
that.
the hot Raphael.
I went with you today to see It Ends With Us.
Yeah, I don't. We're not talking about that movie. All I saw was Blake as Serena Vanderwood's and older. But yeah, he has a whole podcast called is it called Man Enough?
I don't know, but it seems like it's geared towards women.
No, it's geared towards men. Even your reaction kind of makes a point to me, because there are more men that are in this space that like men don't respect them because they're like, oh, they're softer now. So it's like you got these men that are trying to make more spaces to talk about emotions and big feelings and stuff, and you have men that don't respect it.
Well,
it's like you're trying to say there's less spaces, we need more thing, but then it's like the guys that are out there doing it, they're not perfect. I get it, but they're an example, and then a lot of you guys are just
well,
sounds like it's geared towards women.
It's not a one-to-one, right?
No, I know it's not a one-to-one, but it's just you guys are the ones that are like women advocate for women. Men need to advocate for men.
Okay, so then why do you ridicule if something doesn't land? It's like if only guys had a women only podcast talking about women, what do you call it? Like women issues and how women feel. It's like, bro, you don't know our existence as well as you think you do. So don't pretend like you do. No, I understand that it's a man, but a lot of times the podcasts that are geared towards men by men, if they don't touch on topics that are like have to do with things that are like pertain to most men and just kind of parrot the women talking points and then I think it's gonna fail. I'll give you an example. Like I think Joe Rogan has exploded in the beginning because or Jordan Peterson, because he didn't downplay or he didn't put masculinity to subservience, right?
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like some, and I'm not saying Justin's podcast is like this, but some men's spaces that women seem to like are just women talking points, but just said by a man, and then they ignore the masculinity, and these guys aren't these masculine dudes that you would aspire to, and then it's like, well, I don't really want to listen to you because you look like like you're very feminine to me, big homie, and I'm not really looking for that.
Well, Justin Baldoni's pretty good looking too.
Well, he's hot as hell.
But his podcast is really geared towards men, and I think it's very nuanced.
I still think there's still like not as much spaces or not as widely accepted for therapy for men. Interestingly enough, I don't know if these are linked, but they've noticed that more men are joining the church than women these days.
Really?
I have not heard that
at all.
Who
is they?
Who is they? That's a really good point.
I saw a
Who is
statistic.
they?
I'll cite the statistic once I find it. But yeah, the statistics have been showing that more men are younger men are joining the church more than young women.
Well, I mean, I have heard.
And I think that's a lot of the reason, or in part of, there not being places for men to
express
themselves, so they're going back to God.
Well, I heard during the whole election that a lot of men are going back to conservative values. So it wouldn't surprise me that guys are trying to join the church if they're going back to
more of a conservative thing anyway.
Talking about politically conservative or just conservative
values.
Conservative values.
You said election.
It's an umbrella. That's what's when they talked about it. That's when I heard it on a podcast where lots of men were voting more conservatively because they're going back to conservative values, because that's where they're finding that their masculinity is more affirmed, which is, I mean, it shouldn't be a surprise.
I have conservative values, but I wouldn't say I'm definitely voting conservative.
Well, we're not talking about who you voted for, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to avoid politics here.
She mentioned elections, so I don't know.
Yeah, okay. So the whole thing is that I feel like
men have been left behind, though, and I mean, we've talked ad nauseum about it and the reasons why that is, but I think there's still market benefits to the fact that therapy is much more commonplace now.
Yeah, there's a bunch of websites saying it. So New York Times, and first among Christians, young men are more religious than young women.
What year is that?
This is last year, September 25th, 2024.
During the election. Anyway, whatever.
That doesn't.
Okay. Let's have a chat about how the market benefits of therapy and dating, of therapy and dating, where I think there is improved emotional intelligence now. People know better what words to put to their feelings, and therefore are having better relationships. Now, with us dating in our late 20s, early 30s, I think that's really good to have, though I don't think a lot of people have taken advantage, not everyone, I should say, has taken advantage of that benefit that I think a lot of people should, of getting into that improved emotional intelligence. Another benefit I'm seeing is better conflict resolution. I think that's a real thing where we can talk things out. And I'm seeing this like in my relationship where instead of kind of going through the motions of how things are typically done, we kind of just sit down and break it down. Like, okay, what is it that you're trying to say? And then I repeat it back. Is this what you're trying to say? Blah, 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 blah. We've avoided a lot of arguments and a lot of issues, but had I not had that knowledge and that, what do you call it? That the whereabouts to know that, I think I would have had a lot of problems, especially with us being long distance, where we need to talk things out, whether we like it or not, even more so. I'm also seeing that this is something good, which is the normalization of seeking help. So now it's like, well, I'm going to therapy is not like, oh my gosh.
Less stigmatized.
Yeah, way less stigmatized. And I think that's a really good thing where people aren't settling for their flaws. People aren't settling for the things that are holding them back emotionally. I'm not saying everybody's like that, but I think that that's especially good now when, we're trying to date, when we're trying to, because I mean, we're not young anymore. Like once you hit 30, I feel, or people tell me like things really change. So I feel like the more that you are willing, or I should say, still having that willingness to change and better yourself is really good, seeing as we become more entrenched in our identity the older that we get. So the fact that plasticity is still there, I think is a huge benefit.
Yeah.
And also, this is something that I guess men talk about more than women, and it could be controversial, but it's that it has promoted accountability. Now, one thing that men talk about a lot ad nauseum is the fact that women are allergic to accountability.
That's not true.
You don't think that's true?
I don't think that's true. Because women are accountable. It's just how are men defining accountability and how are women defining accountability?
Would you say you're accountable, or would you say women in general?
Talking about accountable for what?
For your actions, right?
Yes.
Esmerna, or like this is not your example. Do I feel like
I'm accountable person? Yes. Are women
like Aranza, for example? She came and you guys came in late, and the first words out of her mouth were, "I'm just a girl." I don't think. Using just her as an example, I think she's representative of the general population like to excuse a lot of stupid behavior and not being accountable by just saying, "Oh, I'm just a girl."
Guys do the same thing.
How?
Boys will be boys.
Yeah, but you guys saying that that's bad.
And you're saying both sexes excuse behavior. I say with therapy, accountability has grown on both sides.
Yeah, I think that's true too. Especially with men, right? To where if you're like passive aggressive, you got to handle that, right? That's no longer acceptable in a healthy relationship. And I think it should go both ways.
Of course.
It should, right? I'm not saying it does. It needs to. And that's something that's huge benefit. And what I think that does is that, especially now, is that, now that our brain has developed and matured at this point, it gives us better discernment for potential suitors, to where you can gauge, okay, does this person know how to handle conflict? Does this person know how to seek help if they need it? Do they know how to clarify things? Are they good at communication? So I think all of that has made our dating lives a whole lot easier now, especially with like knowing what we want and communicating and dealing with a lot of that stuff.
I think it's made it harder. I don't think it has been as easy. I think it might have been simpler or easier for people like a few decades ago, honestly.
I can see where you're coming from, right?
There's just
because
so
there's
much
less criteria, there's less check boxes, or maybe
Well,
it's
that's
simpler.
the thing, because you look at some of the statistics of today, and there's a lot of people who are unsatisfied in their relationships. Even though, like, we have, like, more emotional maturity, or we ask more questions now. The woman has a part, and those are good things. But there seems to be still like a big issue there. I think a lot of it, when it comes to therapy, a lot of people are not content with what's good, or the expectations for what is good are completely different than where they were before. And I think that's
or good enough.
yeah, because a lot of men, they don't think they're good enough. They won't even approach, women these days. And I think, I think that's definitely a problem, and there seems to be, a ideal man or girl in a lot of people's eyes, and they won't, like, I guess, look for any other criteria unless those criteria are met. And then there's other issues where
I think that's true. It's definitely made it more complicated.
it's made it for sure more complicated. And I don't think, like, should it be so complicated? I mean, I say complicated, like, maybe people don't think it's so complicated, but like, I feel like there's a lot of other things that are getting in the way of people finding a good soulmate. You want to make an important decision, but I just feel like there's other issues. We'll get to those.
Yeah, we'll get to those. But just to kind of wrap up the market benefits, or at least that I'm seeing specifically in my relationship, I'm learning, or the fact that I've learned from others' mistakes has helped me avoid pitfalls in my relationship too. Something that wouldn't have been the case had we who have been exposed to so many to like this new era of relationships and dating, we probably wouldn't have been there. To where now there's a focus on learning from others' mistakes, and I think it helps move things along quicker. To where you're like, okay, well, we know we shouldn't yell at each other. Like, it's just, you don't have to really go through that. It's just kind of expected at this point. But I think you're right, Mike. I think it makes a lot of it makes a lot of things more complicated in a lot of ways. I'm seeing it on the socials and in the wild, specifically because, like, let's say a guy does something that a girl doesn't like. He's all of a sudden narcissistic. Oh, we're done. That's it.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's narcissistic at all necessarily, but I think it's a huge misuse or overuse of of therapy speak is what I call it, of just like things that you hear in therapy, and then you just label other people as, oh, this is what I heard, this is what I saw, or this is toxic behavior. It's like, homie, he just had a bad day, she just had a bad day. It's not the end of the world. And I think that's really affecting people, especially in the world. I mean, and I think it's seeping into Adventism, obviously. And I think now that, for specifically for us millennials, are you seeing other pitfalls this Myrna? Because I know a couple episodes ago, like I mentioned, you said you went really hard on the fact that that's not gaslighting. It's like,
Well,
okay,
first of all, I don't talk like that.
right.
But no. Yeah, going off of what you're saying, I think the problem with access to all this knowledge is that I think since as humanity, we're going down, we're not going up. Although they say we're getting better and better, pigs will fly, cars will fly and stuff.
Yeah.
But like, we know that it's there's a cosmic conflict. And with that, since we're going down, resilience is going down. Our process, how the way we process and the way we analyze data has gone down. So that's where the problem comes in, because you have all these sources on Instagram, on TikTok, giving advice as to what to do, what not to do, defining narcissistic behavior, defining gaslighting, all these things. You hear one thing from Joe, you hear one thing from Poppy, and then it's like, if our processing system of how to critique this is not up to date, most likely we end up choosing the one we like the most, or the one we've seen, or so like it's that failing to connect the dots properly in a more logical way. It's what causes the biggest things, right? That's why you hear all these terms just being thrown around like water: gaslighting, narcissism, toxicity. Like,
You're projecting.
these are big words. These are important words that I feel like have lost value because they're just thrown around by so
Willy-nilly.
many people who don't know what they mean.
And this is kind of versatile. To cut you off for 2 seconds, because it's mostly women getting the therapy, in my opinion, I feel like it's more of them tossing it around than men. But continue.
Well, because if they know the words more than men.
Correct.
Men themselves don't know.
That's why I said specifically only
men
because
themselves struggle with naming their emotions. So
Agreed.
Yes.
Agreed.
Yeah. So like you have all these terms and definitions that they might have a kernel of truth to maybe what you're trying to conceptualize or describe it as happening to you, but using the big term narcissism is probably not the best way. That's because like people forget narcissistic disorder is a disorder. Disorders are disorders for a reason, because it means it's something is abnormal in your life to a certain degree. Like there's criteria, like there's a big book, del DSM-5, for these things, and not everybody is this. Like most people aren't narcissistic, although I think
you see a lot more of it today than back in the early days.
Well, yeah, you see it more now because it's more defined and more people know what the characteristics look like.
No, I just think in general, even without that, I just think there's more narcissistic people today.
Okay, I would say that's true because the sin problem has only increased, not decreased. And the sin problem is what? The glorifying of self.
Yes.
And narcissistic
taking
traits
that to its
are more of self, right? So yeah, I would say you're right, Michael. But yeah, I think that's the biggest problem that.
So has therapy helped us, actually?
I would say
yes. Yeah, but there's also downfalls.
But you got to look at your sources.
Yeah, I mean,
TikTok is not necessarily the best.
Well, where should you be getting your therapy?
Well, that's where everybody is nowadays. So that's why I wanted to talk about it, because a lot of, like, for example, I feel like the word boundaries is used too much. Like when when somebody doesn't want to do something, well, that's just my boundary. It's like, no, if I feel like something's bothering me, we have a conversation about it. Boundary abuse, oh, he's such a psychopath, or he has undealt with trauma. That's just way overused in women, because, like I said, women know the concept more than men. Correct, and therefore you see it more from them, right? They're the ones misusing it, and then you hear it more from them, which I think is affecting, which is affecting men, because yes, women know about it, but yes, women are the ones abusing the knowledge of it.
And the men that do know about it abuse it as well.
Well, you see it a lot less.
Everybody abuses it.
For example,
but I do think that there are terms, like, you can't put narcissism and boundaries on the same thing, right? One is a diagnostic.
Also abuse.
A definition. Boundaries is a basic thing that does not need to be in the DSM-5.
Right.
So you can't put the misuse. The misuse
has
levels.
You can misuse boundaries. You can't misuse boundaries.
You can misuse them, but what I'm trying to say is the severity is different.
Yes.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Compared to the DSM.
Yes.
100%. I think abuse is another word that's tossed out. Oh, I feel abused, physically or mentally. It's like, well, just because he asks you to go to the gym is not mental abuse.
Or maybe
or something like that.
I guess my concept of it, since the misuse of it is
And
people go to the extremes. We go to the extremes, right?
Yes, we do.
Because abuse is an extreme, but there's other emotions to describe abuse before getting to the abuse. Does that make sense of what I'm saying?
No, please clarify.
So like, you know how like there's sad and like, here, let me pull up the emotion wheel. You guys know about the emotion wheel, correct?
Nope.
Okay.
I have no idea what that is.
Oh, let me educate you.
but
The emotion wheel. It's like a wheel of emotions, right?
You just flipped the word.
And
Really?
it has the basic ones.
What a revelation.
Yes. Well, you don't
It
even
makes
know
sense
that.
to me.
Is it kind of like the
It makes
color
sense
wheel?
to me now.
Where like you have
It's the color wheel,
where
but
it's like
except
you have
your basic
countering
emotions. And you have your basic ones, so it's
And complementary.
anger, sad, right? But those are just like the basic ones. And then off of those come other ones.
Okay.
Like here, that's why I'm pulling it up just to give you an example. Here it is. Okay, so then it's not loading. Okay, so for example, happy is the basic emotion.
Mm-hmm.
But in happy, you can be then the second tier is what? Playful, content, interested, proud. These are branching off of happy.
Yes.
Right? And then after happy, you can be aroused, cheeky, free. This is a third level, right? So I guess what I was trying to say with that is like I see abuse as like, in a way, sometimes, not all the time, right? It can be like your third level. But what's your first level, second level, third level before going to the extreme of words? Does that make more sense of what I'm saying?
Yes.
Like, it's not abuse going to the gym.
Right.
It's possibly another term.
Uncomfortable.
Exactly. You get uncomfortable before you get abused.
Exactly.
So I guess since we're going to extremes.
Agreed.
I think that's a bad example of what I'm trying to say, but
I think a big one is projecting. Like, oh, he's just projecting, right? Like when someone misinterprets your own emotions and then you put them on another person. Like, oh no, it's like claiming that your partner's angry when you're the one that's angry. No, you're just projecting. Like, oh, he's just projecting onto me. It's like you're actually being an a-hole.
Well, we're
right
always projecting upon each other.
Correct, but I think that the misuse and overuse is killing potential relationships nowadays.
Well,
not to mention, like, for example, if like women, this is a huge thing that I'm seeing, is that when they get called out on something, and this is not, I mean, I'm not trying to hate on women by any means, but I hear this a lot, which is when men try to like saying, oh, well, I feel X, Y, and Z. And then men try to kind of clarify and see what's going on. It's like, well, you're invalidating my feelings. It's like, okay, time out. Just because I'm saying how I'm feeling does not mean I'm invalidating how you're feeling.
No,
and I hear a lot of that. You're invalidating me. It's like, no, I can't have an opinion without it. If it clashes with yours, that's not a crime.
No, it's not.
It's not.
The crime is how we go about communicating to each other.
Exactly. And also there's the deflecting, which is, well, I'm just not
That's a
gonna
huge
deal
thing
with it.
from men. I think men
I
don't
think
even
men
need
suffer
to know
from
the
that.
definition of it. That's
I think
just
we
the
just
natural.
do it naturally, yeah. Like, I'm not the one who's mad right now, it's you. When in reality, I caused, I didn't get anything to you for Valentine's Day for our anniversary. And then the fact that you're upset, it's like, well, why are you upset? Like, I'm calm. You're the one that's upset, so you're the problem. And it's like, that's wrong there, There's a huge disconnect because you're not doing that, obviously. But I don't know. I think women, because they are the ones who know it more, they tend to be the ones that abuse it more. I think it's a shame, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's something that definitely needs to be dealt with. And conversely, I think men have an issue of, because they don't know enough,
Lack of education.
They also don't communicate enough and either deflect or ignore
or gaslight.
Okay.
Which is more of it. Gaslight is in the branch
Use your
of
color
deflecting.
wheel. Use your color wheel.
That's what I'm saying. It's in the branch of it. Gaslighting is probably the extreme. Deflecting, where they're in the same family. So what I'm trying to say is, if it's in the same family, the odds of men doing that more is more, because it's just how it is. But I would say for men, since your men are less educated, they know less words.
Yes.
I would say that the way that I have experienced it, and the way I think a lot of women have experienced it, is that although men probably possibly are less knowing of these things. I mean, Michael didn't even know about the emotion wheel. I would
Nobody
say
knows about that. Whatever, go ahead. You know about the emotion wheel?
Yeah. It's
I've
like,
never heard
yeah,
about
it's like the
that.
color. Yeah. Anyway,
Never heard.
it's like shades.
Yeah. So
But I'm a
the way
nerd,
have
so it's
women
okay.
have seen that men abuse emotions and abuse concepts of this is a lot of the times to manipulate or to get out of something.
And vice versa,
for
yeah.
I'm talking about men now. You had your time about women. I'm doing my time on men.
You do that to me all the time. When I'm talking about men, you're like, and men. So
Okay.
don't get surprised when I do it too.
Okay, well,
I'll let you have
I
it.
still have a right to talk back
And
at
I
it.
have it, and I have the right to call
Anyways,
you out too.
I guess what I'm saying is that, like, for example, this is tale as old as time. Men bring flowers when they mess up, right? Or they tend to show their emotions when they're just like when they want to get out of a bind, right?
Yeah.
So then that causes women to a lot of the times, like, oh, you got me flowers. What did you do? Right?
Oh man,
What did you
that's
do?
true. Yeah.
Right? So, because
Mhm.
like you've seen that, and a lot of us have seen that in our parents, right? Although, with therapy, we know that it's better now, right?
Mhm.
And that culture is being less promoted, but there's still that generational thing of it in us in women where it's since a lot of men know less of this lingo, so when it comes up, it's like, what are you trying to do here? It's like it comes off a lot as manipulation and trying to
Mhm.
get out of stuff. So, and that contributes to that whole problem of like men showing the emotions, because like if men only show emotions when they're in trouble, like then you have like the whole thing of like, well, women think that men are if they cry, so it's like this whole it's like this vicious cycle of like men a lot of the times only show their emotion when they're in trouble or they want to get out of a bind, and it can come off ungenuine, and then women can get biased of that. So I think, like you're saying, to summarize, you're saying women know more of these terms so they can misuse them more. Men know less of these terms, but yet what they do know, they only use it when they're in trouble. That can happen too. So
They use the terms when they're in trouble. It doesn't make any sense. You can't use the terms if you don't know them.
Yeah, guys get educated real quick on terms.
Yeah, but I think that's in edge cases, like when they mess up. That's specifically when they mess up.
But most men only express
not
themselves when they mess up.
Yeah, but you're saying like when you're in trouble is
Then when
like
you're in
like
trouble,
when you're in trouble in a relationship. You're saying
Mhm.
like when you messed up.
Yeah.
And I think, to be honest, I think this is the smart dudes who want to manipulate women or who want to weaponize it against them.
Yeah, they weaponize.
But I don't think there's a majority of men who learn those things to
I
do
think
that.
so.
I completely disagree.
And I think it's a cultural thing.
Here's another one. I think that there is an over-analysis or a hyper-analysis of every aspect of a potential relationship. Has he had therapy before? If he hasn't, then I'm not gonna be in a relationship with him. If he hasn't worked through his trauma, then he's not. What if he had like a really, really good childhood?
Yeah.
Like, does that mean that, like, oh, if he hasn't gone through what you've gone through, that doesn't work? And the huge one for me is that a lot of women or people, guys too, obviously, but is that they run a lot of their potential relationship or their relationship through a therapy lens. So you don't just see what your partner does. You see what your partner does and then try to categorize it in a mental health type of thing. Like, oh, he was being passive aggressive there, or that was insecure attachment. Let me see how I can do that. Like just like seeing things and seeing life through that instead of just looking at the person for who they are. So then I feel like, a lot of what I'm seeing is that there's a lot of falling into kind of just what you hear from, X or Y podcast or even Z podcast, and there's no actual individual thought. So then when you actually have a conversation on mental health, with this woman or that woman, they don't actually have anything to say that's not just regurgitated and something that comes from their dome, and that's actually what do you call it? And that's original, and I think that's a huge problem. And one huge example that you and I both know, and it's pretty clear, is she tends to just regurgitate everything that she hears with very little critical thought from my perspective. And that's kind of annoying, because when you ask her to just like her opinion on something, like she'll just say like the party line, and you're like, oh, okay. That's okay. You think exactly like everybody else, and that's disappointing and really sad.
That's not wrong, because like, have you heard of the concept? There's no such thing as an original thought.
Yes.
Where like it reminds me of Solomon. There's nothing new under the sun.
Okay.
So like, yes, you can have your. We all have our own thoughts. We are our own world. But I think at the end of the day, we're all saying the same stuff, just in different ways and in our own lingo.
Yes, but what I'm saying is that it doesn't go through a filter to come out as Myrna sees it or as Josue sees it.
Yeah,
it just goes straight through.
The personal seasoning is gone.
Yes,
that's what you're saying.
Yes, and that's a huge problem, because
that's the disappointing part.
The disappointing part. Thank you.
If she has that same perspective, but her life view is not included, that's when it comes off as just basic.
Agree to agree.
But I would also say that having a therapy lens, you can't demonize it, because that is an important thing, because passive aggressive comments and like categorizing these things, it's not a bad thing. Now if you're doing it as a defense mechanism, I would always go back
or as the default even,
or I would go back to as what is the root cause of doing this, because if it's from an insecure place, then most of the time you can categorize it as wrong. But if you are, you can notice a passive aggressive statement and say it. But it goes back to it's case by case basis. But the rule is most people aren't aren't mental health professionals to have all the clarity and the nuance of all these terms. So there is room for error. But nobody's looking for perfection in these. It's more of actually like educating yourself more, because you said that there's TikToks and stuff. That's what all this stuff is. But it's like, what TikToks are you following, right? Because like all the doctors are on TikTok now.
Yeah.
Therapists are on TikTok now. But are you choosing to follow Jake Paul's advice on mental health because he has a better podcast setup? He's got more money for ads. Whereas you have the doctor's content, which is not it's not
as well produced.
It's not clickbait. It's not as well produced. It's
doesn't
not
have good marketing.
Pretty. It's not marketed. So like who your sources are, and that, so if my sources are good and I have these terms, you can bet that the definition of this is going to be good. That's a benefit, that you can have that lens and more of what to look for and what to think. But it's like the sources that's why you got to keep an eye out for.
Agreed. I think another one that comes to mind for me is that if in a hyperfixation on therapy and therapy speak, as I call it, is that you can develop unrealistic expectations for your partner or your future partner. So like, I think that's something that's affecting some of us now in our late 20s, early 30s, which is that we're expecting someone, because maybe we've done the work, we're expecting someone who's already fully healed and emotionally perfect.
We're all looking for a finished product.
We're all looking for a finished product. And I think nowadays, because we have the illusion of choice, of more choices now, we tend to take that to the extreme. And then you add the therapy on top of all your already list of unrealistic expectations, and then you can get to the point where you're dismissing options because of insecurities or because of flaws either in yourself or in your potential partner. And I think that that's a problem.
And I'll
be honest, that's something that almost kept me away from a relationship with her today where I saw some flaws and I saw some emotion, some areas where she wasn't emotionally mature. And I'm like, well, that's stupid. Why would I have to deal with that? And then I had to sit myself down and I was like, well, you can't be unrealistic. You can't be stupid about this. Just because she's not there yet doesn't mean she won't be.
Yeah,
right.
and you
So
have stuff
I almost
too,
talked
right?
and I have stuff too. So, I mean, that works too. I'll also say,
I think, okay.
So go
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, 'cause I haven't talked in a while. I
Yeah.
mean, this is like you guys' two main, like your major main topic for you guys. But I would think that I'm gonna start with this. So I remember like when I first started being interested in girls, I would like a girl. I was a kid, all right. I wasn't caring about girls for like,
Yeah.
when I was like 5 or 6. But when I was like around 10, 12 years old, I was like, oh, okay. Actually, no, I think the first girl I liked I was like 5 years old.
Hmm.
But I was just feeling. I didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
But like when I actually started to like, want to pursue something with a girl, I might have been like, 12, 13, 14. And when I found a girl that I liked, I would like block out everything. And like she would be the only girl that I'd put
You would hyper focus.
Yeah, just full attention on her. Like she's the only girl I want. Like I'm not thinking of or looking at any other girl. Like
Right.
it's just like 100% her. And I would do that like for a while, and I would hold on to that girl for a long time. And I would get hurt really bad in the process. And I was wondering, like, I would talk to my mom about this, and be like, well, like, this hurts. Like, why is this happening or whatever? And she was like, you can't really hyper focus on like one person, like you got to have this like
options
mindset. Yeah, like options.
That sounds awful
but that's what
context, right?
But that's what the world is now. Like,
but in an Adventist context,
I feel. I mean, my mom's Adventist. She's
so why would she recommend something like that?
Because like you never know. I guess is what she's saying. Like you don't want to put all your marbles into one basket. That's what she's telling me because you'll get hurt.
I think.
And so hold on, let me finish.
Yeah,
and so
sorry.
I think a lot of what we're seeing is in the church and out of the church is that a lot of people have this mindset where, okay, here's this girl, but there's also this girl. And there's this girl and there's this girl, or this guy and this guy. You have this like, what was the word you used? Mindset. This the like when you're thinking of multiple people. This
options.
Yeah, options. That's not even the word I wanted. But yeah, you have like all these options, and I think people are conditioning their minds to look at people that way.
That's true, yeah.
And so
dehumanizes them.
Yeah. And so now, like, because even especially in the secular world, like, it's very normal for people to, when you're in the dating world, to hook up with multiple people, like be talking and hooking up with people at the same time, multiple people at the same time.
Yeah.
Like it's very normal. And so you condition your mind to like automatically think that way. And it's very hard to, when you want to finally settle down or you find a really good woman, it's very hard to like, look at her that way or to get out of that mindset. Because I was talking to one of my friends about this, and there's a girl, he's a guy, and he was like saying like, yeah, my friend, like he cannot like, and he's not in the church, but he's like, yeah, he cannot like settle down, be monogamous, right? He's been with like 200 women, he said.
That's insane.
Yeah. And he said like he just can't do it. It doesn't work for him. And he thinks it's totally fine. He's like, some people just like that. But I'm like, dude, that's not like healthy.
We weren't built that way. Yeah,
we weren't built that way. He's like, he doesn't believe that. He's like, well, that's just, that works for him. Like that's what he wants. He said he's talked to him about it. He said he just literally can't do it. And I'm like, of course, in my head, I'm like, of course he can't do it because he's been living this way for so long. And not everybody, I don't know actually what the numbers are, but I feel like there are a lot of people out there who, have these long like lists of options, this roster of people. Yeah. And it just makes it.
And they end up choosing nobody.
Hard. Yeah. So you definitely have to, like, if you're of that mindset or if you lived that past, like you definitely need therapy or to like think about like, take active mental steps to be able to like, train your mind not to automatically think like that.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Because that does not lead to like
a happy
success with like one person.
Yeah. And I mean, you also have to remember hyperfixation, it's not a good thing coming from you, from us as well, because it's coming usually from a place of insecurity in ourselves, right? So we're already starting on the wrong. And then, we get hurt, but it's not, I feel like a lot of the times it's not for lack of options. It's more of what my favorite guy likes to say, the story we tell ourselves about the other person or what we project in the relationship. Yep. So it's like you have to like start seeing the relationships for what they are and not for what you are projecting them to be or what it is you're looking at it. Because then the story we tell ourselves is usually what's hurting us.
Ellen White talks about that. She talks about castle building.
Like
don't do it. And I struggled with that a lot. And it's nothing wrong with like, thinking like, oh man, this girl, should be cool to like, go out with, and you kind of think about it, but you don't want to like, overdo it and like, just constantly think about that with this person. Like also like in the back of your head, like, well, this is not real.
But I also think going off of this whole conversation about how like there's nuance and there's the concepts of all these things can get lost with all the noise that there's out there on self-help. I think that in a relationship, and I would want this, I think in my relationship, and Mike, you made me think about it in the car, is that there's marital counseling, but I think I would want to do dating counseling in the sense that in dating, you have to have important conversations. And a lot of the times we might not do it the best way, right? Because you can easily lose the concept of a mental health concept real easily, right? In the throes of it with an emotional person and with your emotional part, with your significant other. Why do I keep wanting to say emotional? And therapy, at the end of the day, a therapist is a guide, someone, it's kind of like an intermediary, someone that can throw out questions that you never thought would be out there. So I think therapy can be a good thing to gather because that way you have a licensed professional who knows the concept of all these things that, like you're saying, can get misused. And you can bring it all at the table. So that way each party is clear on what each thing means and can get clarification on things right away. So I think that dating and therapy should be more of a thing, like going to therapy together, not just for marriage counseling. At the end of the day, a requirement, so the pastor will marry us.
Go, like, even if there's no problems, just go.
Huh?
You're saying go just in like
even if there's no problems?
It could be an option, yeah. Even if you want to discuss a certain topic that you want a mediator or someone that can guide you with the correct questions, right? For example, like if you're family planning, right? This is marriage.
You wouldn't go to the pastor?
Huh?
You wouldn't go to the pastor?
I wouldn't go to the pastor. I'd rather go to a therapist 100%.
But the pastor can give you a spiritual.
Yeah, but I would go to the pastor for the spiritual aspect.
But everything is spiritually related.
Yes and no.
Like give me an example.
Like I wouldn't go to a pastor for marital counseling.
But let me finish my point.
I would not go to a pastor for marital counseling.
Why not?
He's not a professional. He's not a mental health professional.
I mean, there are pastors that are licensed in mental health.
But then they're just mental health professionals who happen to be pastors.
But
so they're
vice
both.
versa.
But so you're going to go to a secularly trained
Christian or Adventist.
There's Christian therapists.
Rather than a pastor, 100%.
Okay.
Okay, so back to my point. I think that should be more of a popular thing, going to a therapist to discuss big topics, because big topics are not necessarily problems. Why is it that we only want to discuss the problems? Problems become problems because you don't discuss topics in a correct way. So yeah, I would go to therapy if there was no problem. Now, saying that is the norm, that is the must, right? That's the extremes that we're seeing out there. Like, if you haven't gone to therapy, I don't want to date you.
Yeah.
But like, what's underneath that? It's not going to therapy.
Do people actually say that if you haven't gone to therapy? I don't want to date you.
I've heard it.
It's more of like an emotion. It's more of, do you know yourself, right? So it's like the odds are that someone has gone to therapy has worked on their traumas, right?
Right.
So it's more. So I think that's like, people throw that out there. Like, if you haven't gone to therapy, I don't want it. But in reality, what they really want is somebody to know themselves and know how to adequately
and know how to communicate well.
And that's where people have to connect. So I think a therapist is good in guiding that conversation, and it should be done before marriage, because I think a lot of, especially in the Christian church, I think they go to marital counseling just to check off the box. And you've already made up your minds that you're going to get married. Whether this, sure, the marital counseling might go bad, but like, you're already in the bliss of marriage. You're planning. You already booked the venue. This is just the checklist. So it shouldn't be treated as a checklist. Like, why are you talking about these big topics when you're already got the venue? When there's already that pressure. Like, yeah, you could always call off the wedding, but most people aren't going to. And that's just seen with regrets people say when they get married.
Yep, very true. Two things I will say before we wrap up too is that the misuse and hyperfixation of therapy and therapy speak is that it not only affects the way you see your partner, but also the way you see yourself and how you're in your relationship to dating and relationships. So, for example, if you overemphasize on, am I perfect? Have I done all the work? Have I done everything I need to do? What that does, and is it kind of makes you what do you call it? It can act as a crutch to avoid relationships, and then you can stay on the I'm not ready for a relationship indefinitely, and that can hurt you.
That's just fear, and you're rationalizing it with therapy.
Yes, that's exactly right. And also the overemphasis on over independence.
That's a hyperfixation. Correct. I will keep using these terms.
That's fine. Go ahead. I think it affects more women than men. I'm gonna lose myself. I'm an independent woman. I don't really need no man. Blah 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 blah. And then that you can use. To fear.
Sorry,
do you see how you're interrupting me? See how you're doing?
I'm not interrupting. I guess I'm putting terms of that we're talking about.
Oh yeah, you're right. Sorry, but I think we can avoid these pitfalls and generally improve is by realizing that therapy is a tool. It is not a cure-all, so don't expect it to be.
It's not.
It's not. I think there's a danger in perfectionism, so we need to be aware to avoid that and to realize that no one's going to be perfect, neither you nor your partner, so don't expect it. Also, there's no one size fits all, meaning that not everybody has to go to therapy. Now, I would say that
that was an interruption. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would say that is a hot take where not everybody needs therapy, and I think some people would disagree, and that's fine.
Not everybody needs hot take. I don't think that's a hot take or a therapy. I don't think that's a hot take.
I think everybody would disagree, actually.
I think
everybody needs therapy.
I think everyone will need therapy at one point in their life. Notice how I said that.
Okay, that's
at
fair.
one point in their life, and it's not. There's more than just therapy out there. There's coaches, right? So I think the only shoe that fits all is Jesus.
Yes,
and He is the solution to everything.
If you rely on Jesus, that's the coach right there.
That's true. I think a male.
I guess if you're saying that's therapy, then sure, yes, we all need therapy because Jesus is the therapist.
Therapy.
Yeah. All right. And then I think a male specific one is that I think we as men need to take more interest in bettering our vocabulary to be able to communicate our feelings better and to avoid and to not, to not fall into the pitfalls that are put out there and to, not continue said generational trauma. Another thing I will say is for men, if you can find a space to share your emotions or something, I think you need to create it. Something that was really interesting is that
within your friendship.
Yeah, exactly. No, you're right. They did this thing where they had men just sit in a circle and talk about their feelings, just like some studies, and they realized that they didn't feel open, but
within themselves.
Well, it just felt weird, but they put them in front of a workbench and told them to do stuff. And all of a sudden, everything started flowing out.
And that's the difference between men and women. And that's also a barrier with therapy, right? Because talk therapy, sitting down therapy can benefit more women. But it's proven that men benefit more from therapy if they're walking, if they're doing something.
Right.
So the modality of the therapy looks different. And that is an area in mental health that needs to be improved in order to provide more more openness to men, where it's not just providing the sit down therapy, realizing what your client needs. And if you're a man, go for a walk with this guy. Like he'll open up more.
or build a model airplane or something. I think that's true. And then lastly, I will say that we should just look at people for who they are, who their actions say they are, and not necessarily through a therapy lens, because everybody's different, right? Like I may be insecure and it may not be a pathological thing. It could just be I'm just not as competent, and therefore I'm not as whatever. So,
or use what I would say is use the therapy lens as a tool to help you ask questions.
Ask the right questions.
Because
that's a really good point.
You can have the lens, but at the end of the day, you're not a mind reader. We're not Jesus. So that's why you have to ask questions. That's where you have to get curious. So you can use the information, filter through it, and then actually put it into action by asking the other person, not just assuming.
Agree to agree. Anything else, Mike?
No, I mean, you guys said a lot. So
way too much.
All right, Doc, do you mind leading us out in prayer?
It's good.
Yeah. Dear Jesus, thank you so much for a beautiful day that you've given us. Thank you for the fact that you are the solution to all of our problems, and we need you. So I pray, Father, that whether it be through therapy, whether it be through talking to our friends, and also seeking you, that we may be able to consecrate ourselves fully to you, so that you may be able to fill our need that only you can fill, and thus it will impact in a good way all other areas of our life, and we can show and be an example to others. Thank you for giving us this time and your love. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.